So thrilled to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are. I'm Will Butler. I'm the VP of Community at Be My Eyes, and I'm joined by my colleague Joe Weber, who's managing some of the slides today, and some of our wonderful guests, some of whom will come and go throughout the course of the webinar. Folks from Google and Microsoft, of course, and I just want to kick it off today with someone who is a personal inspiration to me. We share a lot of background, and we share a lot of a similar personal journey. She's been in this business of advocating for people with disabilities for 20 years, and she's the founder of a movement called the Valuable 500. If your company isn't a part of it yet, it's something you should certainly look into. So for the next few minutes, we're going to hear from the wonderful Caroline Casey. Caroline, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, but you're a particularly hard man to say no to. And he is, like, come on. I did a podcast with Will a few weeks ago, and you kind of remind me of me because there's no such thing as a free lunch, and hence everybody has to have me for these few minutes. But Will talked about the fact that we have a shared lived experience, I guess. I myself am severely visually impaired, and I guess that's why I'm a massive fan of Be My Eyes. And the reason I am a fan of it is because it's the human part of accessibility. I'm always a little bit nervous when I'm ever asked to talk at anything around accessibility, particularly the digital and tech type. I'm known to be quite the Luddite and quite a slow learner. And so my experience of this lockdown has been very challenging for me, and I've had to learn fairly quickly, and I've realized I am definitely a digital introvert. And I guess it's probably why I'm very passionate about what Be My Eyes is, because for me, it's about the support, that human to human support at scale. And we can have all the greatest ideas and technology for accessibility, but it's also about human beings. And so where I come to about this, when we talk about the business case for inclusion and accessibility, I think, look, there is no doubt that the current situation that we're all living through has have really exposed us to a few things. One is that we've had this sort of collective or mainstream exclusion, or a sense of our freedom being taken away from us. And so there is a kind of an energized empathy, I hope. The second thing is, there is no doubt it has blown open and amplified the inequality and the inequity in our world, which maybe lots of people haven't been aware of. Number three, it has also exposed that systems can change. These business systems that we didn't think could change absolutely responded quick and fast. And those businesses that had inclusion and accessibility in their DNA were the ones that actually not just survived, but thrived. And I think fourthly is this. So we're all communicating. We're all communicating online. And so we really have to think about, it's no longer, there's no more excuses for about, well, we might do that next year or somewhere else. We really need to look at how we fully include and are accessible for our customers and our employees, because we really need to risk-proof our businesses. And as a testament to that, I just want to say the Valuable 500, which please go out and check, and please come and join us. We had over 40 CEOs and companies join in the period of lockdown. And the reason that they're joining is because they know that this issue of accessibility and inclusion is now. It's really needed now. And it's not a compliance issue, but an opportunity for innovation and for growth, and the insight that they can gain from a community of 1.3 billion people cannot be left on the table. And just a small story, I just wanted to make it personal. I've done a lot of speaking over the years, and particularly around the valuable 500. Actually, probably too much speaking. I may not see well, but I definitely overtalk. And I was asked to moderate a panel at this incredible AI conference a few weeks ago. And like, can I just say, this was like a dream panel, and it was a phenomenal event. But I couldn't moderate the panel because I wasn't, as a visually impaired person, able to see the questions coming in that I would need to give to the panelists without shoving my forehead into the screen, which is not really very cool. Now, that is just a minor and a small piece. So what I wanted to kind of, in opening this, is to say, first of all, for all of you that are here, thank you. Because just turning up and being here, part of this conversation, is what's important. Every single organization and human is at a different maturity level of this journey. And what I know Be My Eyes really wants you to understand at the end of this is that they are here. They're part of that solution. They have huge breadth of experience. And what we're all here to do is to learn collectively together. And that hopefully at the end of this seminar, that you may have the data, okay? The data to go convince your leadership. Because a lot of you who are here, even if you're beginning or scaling or leading, you keep wanting to make that a bigger movement within your business and not something niche. And you need that backed up by data. So when we think about who's going to be contributing today, we have Google and we've got Microsoft, and they're going to give you, it's sort of like the confessional. You're going to hear it all. It's no holds barred, truth, honesty, and all in. Because when we're innovating, we're learning, right? And we're not going to get it all right. But the big thing right now is not to be intimidated out of the opportunity that exists. And so I'm just going to go back to where I began. There is nothing more potent when you bring a head and a heart into a game, when you bring stats and story, and when you bring human and technology. And for me, why I think Be My Eyes is an extraordinary opportunity for your businesses to work with is that they're here to handhold you through this process. Nobody's pointing fingers. Nobody's about to shame. We're just here to say is we're in it together. We learn from each other. And to have the courage maybe to say, like, I actually don't know what to do or where to go, and to share best practice with each other. And if a Luddite like me can get on and do this, anybody can. And so what my hope is, as we emerge out of COVID, is that as we reset this business system that we so deeply need to reset, it's every single one of you on this call reaching out to make a connection to somebody else to improve your accessibility and inclusion journey, which goes way beyond disability, not only to give you a greater opportunity with your business, greater visibility within your leadership, but also a great opportunity to risk-proof your business, because something like this can happen again, but insight, innovation, and growth. So this is one Luddite handing over to the experts, and to say a huge thank you to an organization, Be My Eyes, who I deeply respect, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's incredible the work that you've done to recruit, I mean, just absolutely hundreds of CEOs to put their signature on a piece of paper that says we're committed to supporting people with disabilities at our large global companies. So thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate you getting us pumped up this morning.
I'm dialed down for you right now. This is me dialed down because it's 5 o'clock in Ireland, so I'm going off for a cocktail soon.
To remind folks that this is the dialed down version of Caroline. Well, thank you, Caroline. And please feel free to stick around, and we won't be offended if you mute your video or audio as well, but we always want you to be a part of the conversation as well. So thanks, Ken. And I just want to introduce our guests from Google and Microsoft, and then I'll give a bit of background about where we're going today in the next 50 minutes, what we'll be able to talk about. Kendra Lococo from Google, say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much for joining us from Redwood City. And then Neil Barnett, I think you're on the phone. Can you hear us, Neil?
I can hear you fine.
Great, thanks for joining us, Neil. Yep. Where are you in Seattle, Neil?
Yeah.
So Neil Barnett from Microsoft. Both of you have been such a crucial part of our journey, and I'm going to kind of just take a moment before we dive in, just to kind of like set everyone on the same level for those who may not know what we've been up to for the last few years. There are a couple hundred people here who haven't always, been involved in accessibility. We're a small, tight-knit community, but we have some, we're always trying to grow. One note before we really jump in, we're having some issues with the captioning. I'm concerned that it's an issue with Zoom. And I just want to reassure everyone, and please help us by spreading the word about this if possible, that if the captioning doesn't get going, there is going to be a transcript. It's really important to us that everyone be able to access these things. So we're going to keep working on the captioning in the background, but there will also be a transcript shortly after. So sorry about that for folks who may be struggling. So for those who don't know, on a very basic level, what we do at Be My Eyes is we're a community support platform for the blind and low vision community. This is a global platform with more than 4 million users now, where anyone can join to support a blind or visually impaired person. This is a volunteer, just as an individual. Some of you in the room today might have already even had your first call where you're able to assist someone. And then a couple of years ago, we took a step back and we said, all of these volunteers are helping blind and visually impaired people with products and services that really should be more accessible. I mean, in a sort of perfect world scenario, the connection, the bridging gap of Be My Eyes wouldn't need to exist, because the products and services should be designed in a way that are accessible to everyone. So we approached Microsoft, and we talked to them about the idea of, what if you could receive calls from the blind and visually impaired community? And it just so happened to coincide with the creation of Microsoft's Disability Answer Desk, which is designed specifically to support people with disabilities in using their technology in the specific ways that they do. So we're going to talk a lot today about, what disability support looks like at both Google and Microsoft. But we're also going to give you some very specific tools for making that pitch, making a case for why accessibility is not just good for people and for helping people with disabilities, but why it's good for business as well. Neil and Kendra are both experienced in doing this. They both know how to sell accessibility and disability support internally at their big organizations that are bottom line concerned. Always looking at the bottom line. And so they're going to give us some really valuable bits of advice today about how you, as an accessibility champion or an advocate in your business for accessibility, can get senior leadership buy-in and can make big things happen that end up making big cultural changes at your organization that lead to the sort of positive outcomes that Caroline was talking about. So I do want to start by asking Neil and Kendra, what makes you passionate about supporting people with disabilities at Google and Microsoft? Kendra, maybe we can start with you. Why is this important to you?
Well, on my side, I got into accessibility mainly because my mom is a wheelchair user. So I kind of grew up with it in my life, right? But I think over time, what I started realizing is that it's not just my mom that it's affecting. It really starts affecting my entire family, our friends, our allies. And so over time, we started consciously deciding, which companies should we be putting our money towards, which companies, really think about inclusivity. And so I think I started immediately understanding the concept of, yes, there are a billion people in this world with some form of disability, but it also starts to include friends and families and allies and people who don't self-identify as having disabilities. And eventually it starts reaching everyone. So I really thought of it as, you know, a space that maybe we hadn't prioritized yet at the time. And I think it's been really exciting to see it start to be prioritized, because in the end, it really just means having product excellence, right? Having a better product, a better experience for everyone. So that's, I'll keep it short because I know we're short on time, but that's sort of my background.
And Neil, what about you? What got you into this?
Yeah, so I've worked on accessibility probably the last 7 or 8 years at Microsoft, and coming from a customer support background, it was really clear to me that we could do more around customer support than what we typically do, that what most companies typically do. And whether that's providing, you know, American Sign Language support for the deaf community, or kind of innovating with Be My Eyes, it's just, I was pretty passionate about how we can meet customers on their terms versus our terms. And then, you know, as you touched on, you know, what's the impact, right? And so by using something like Be My Eyes, we've really been able to reach out and understand issues with our products and services, and as Kendra said, how to improve that voice of the customer. And so for me, it was just a great opportunity to marry up accessibility and, you know, customer support and customers. And it's been a journey.
So I should note to everyone that Neil and Kendra have both published these incredible playbooks, these disability support playbooks that you can access, and we'll be sending them out to everyone after the webinar, that really break down exactly how they went about establishing these customer support centers. And they really can be, we'll talk about this, established at any scale. Kendra, I also want to just draw attention to one point you made, which is that growing up with a mother with a disability, it wasn't just about her and the products she was purchasing. You were making decisions as a family unit. And that's something that, you know, we'll talk about more when we start to talk about making your pitch. If folks have questions and they want to, you know, burning questions here, there's a function to raise your hand. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Zoom webinar platform, but you can press the command Alt-Y or Option Y, and that will initiate your hand raising. If you will be taking questions toward the end, and if you have your question answered, feel free to put your hand down, and all the hands that will be up, we'll call on as many as we can at the end. So one of the things in your playbook, I don't remember which playbook it was in, and I think we both discussed this, was that words are important, right? What you call these things is super important to getting it through at the company. So again, Kendra, to you, why disability as opposed to, say, accessibility? Why did you choose those words so specifically?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually, for those who don't know, I contacted Neil when I was very first starting the disability support team. And one of my first questions to him was, I'm curious to know why you chose disability over accessibility, because what I had seen at, or on the central accessibility side before we had the disability support team, was about 70% of, you know, what's called out of scope inquiries, people essentially that were asking for password resets so they couldn't access their email and things like that, which technically, you know, isn't wrong for accessibility. It is an access issue. So I wanted to make sure that when we had a disability support team, we were really focusing in on assistive technology and how to better support people with disabilities through technology. So I'll actually let Neil talk to it a little bit more, but that was the first thing that we talked about, and he kind of concurred with that.
Yeah, I mean, Kendra, you hit it right on the head. I think when we launched in 2012, we called it the Accessibility Answer Desk, and we were inundated with, I can't get into my Hotmail, my Outlook, my network. So it was all accessibility for many people means internet access, email access. And so we quickly realized that we had to be a little more clear in our description. And so we changed the name to Disability Answer Desk. And to Kendra's point, today we have customers, about 15,000 calls we handle a month that are calling us from the disability community around assistive technology, using it with Microsoft products or other products. Yeah, and so it's been a really smart decision to just change that slight word from accessibility to disability in the case of our support desk.
Right. And accessibility is a funny word, right? Because on one hand, it's sort of jargon, right? It means something very specific within our industry. On the other hand, it's a general word that the general population uses all the time, like, oh, that wasn't accessible to me. And it doesn't necessarily mean much to them. It doesn't mean have a technical meaning. So I think I did want to underscore that point for folks is when you're talking internally at your companies about why you need to support people with disabilities, using the right words is important. And these two have found that disability is the right word, but it's about matching your company culture and making sure that the culture at your company, that you're speaking to whatever the values are of the leaders at the company when you're pitching this. So let's just get right into it. How does disability support work? Be My Eyes creates tools for both supporting customers support, public facing, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, as well as employee facing, so internal private video support. But you two have both sort of innovated on the customer service front. How does a disability support team work in tandem with a general customer support team? Neil, maybe we could start with you for this one. There are a lot of ways to structure this, right?
Yep, exactly. There are a lot of ways to structure this, and every company is different. Every culture is different, and so by no means is the Microsoft or Google way the only way to do it. So at Microsoft, there are thousands and thousands of support agents, and across all products. And so what we decided to do was kind of carve out, right, a smaller team dedicated to disability, where we could train up on third-party assistive technology. And that's such a big piece of it. It's just not knowing your product, your company's CRM, whatever your product is. To be effective, you really got to understand the assistive technology landscape and how those technologies work. So it's almost like learning a second language besides your initial language, which is your product. And so we have what I would say is a smaller team that focuses on this, that can really go deep. So it's breadth of products and depth. And we're able to then innovate, whether it's with Be My Eyes or with social media support, or all the other channels that you may want to test with, to kind of really reach out to the community. And again, it's all about getting that voice of the customer back into your business.
And Kendra, it's again, so you want to have people answering these calls trained up to answer, to support people, knowing that they might be using a screen reader software, or might be communicating non-verbally, but the people who are actually answering the calls can be pretty much anywhere, right? They can be centralized, they can be part of an existing team, or they can be, as you've done it, a vendor in some other location.
Yeah, and when we first started looking at the way we wanted to set our team up, I had pitched 4 different options essentially to our senior leadership, and I sort of broke down what the cost of that might look like, how much, or what the scaling of that might look like, how much headcount we might need, where we would scale to. Similar to Neil, because we are larger companies, is we had a lot of different support teams supporting multiple products, and so we looked at, should we just hire a few contractors and sort of pilot this ourselves, but that was kind of going to be a difficult transition into eventually trying to hand off and let it scale for hopefully people that are much smarter than I am in the support realm. We also looked at, should we just train a few experts within each product? We were really nervous about turnover and the consistency of having to retrain. As Neil said, you have to have some serious expertise around assistive technology. And those who are in the support space probably know that the typical habit of a support agent is to say things like, do you see the green light, at the top right corner? Do you see this button? And so it is like it's a deep training and it's a habit really. And eventually we came to the solution that if we wanted this to really scale and be supported within our central operations support team, then it would need to pilot within that team and eventually go out of what we call our incubation center and become a matured team and let them scale it, which is where it's at now. So it really depends on what your business structure is, what your model is, but you can honestly go as small or as large as you possibly want. And I think what we loved about Be My Eyes was the fact that it's global. You can kind of plug and play it. You can use your own agents. There's no integration. So it just made it kind of a really easy tool to scale up with or down if we needed to.
Yeah. Talking a little bit about that. So I think a lot of people are a little daunted by the task of serving the globe, for all of their accessibility needs. Obviously, Google and Microsoft, y'all are a little more experienced at that. But when it comes to scaling, talk a little bit about growing. I mean, like you didn't start, today Microsoft is offering support 24/7, Google almost that. You have multiple call centers. You didn't start supporting people with disabilities at that scale. In fact, it only took a couple people, right? Kendra, could you maybe kind of tell you how Neil got you started? Feel free to.
Yeah, like anything, we take the approach of what I call, crawl, walk, run, where you just start small. And so when we started this, it was, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And we didn't even start with all the bells and whistles with, a Be My Eyes or sign language support like Google has too. It was just, phone or phone, email, and chat. Some very basic ways for customers to contact a disability support desk. So the concept of having folks that were experts or stronger in the ability to understand technology. And we just started small. And then as the demand grew, as I mentioned, we're doing 15,000 contacts a month roughly. We had to say, okay, what do we do for hours? How do we better connect to customers that aren't calling? How do we find those customers? And so it gradually grows, whether it's hours, whether it's days, whether it's other channels, which is what we've been very focused on, growing our channels to support customers. It's definitely a phased approach, and you can start with just a couple folks and one channel. It's just getting started, I think, is the key.
Yeah, we were very similar. Probably no surprise, since I definitely leaned on Neil a lot when we first started. So, we started just with email, and we had a 72-hour SLA where, we just needed to respond within 3 days. And we took it really slow in the sense that we only announced it to a small portion of our community and really tried to listen to the feedback on some of the canned responses we were using and, all these different things that we were trying. And I think our agents had an especially a difficult time because we didn't want to provide support for just one of our products in accessibility. These agents were expected to not only be experts in assistive technology, but also experts across all of Google products. And so when we first started, there was a really big concern that, why don't we just focus on one product and be experts on that, like a YouTube and maybe an Android. But I just thought it would be such a poor customer experience if they were to say, I need help on my Chrome, and we say, oh, we only support accessibility on YouTube and Android. So it was a really difficult problem that I think we were really nervous to get right, and we wanted to make sure we did get it right. And so I think that scaling slowly but surely is at least for us, was really the best way.
And so talk a little bit more about the tools, the actual tools that your support teams use to get the job done, because there's support for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and there's support for people who are blind and visually impaired, and obviously we do the latter. But how has it been integrating these tools into the call center process, making sure they're seamless? Either one of you could take that.
I think for me, I kind of already touched on the Be My Eyes side. It was super easy because there is no integration. So our same as Neil, I think our our agents will have their typical case management system open in front of them, and then they'll have a tablet to their left that's separate with Be My Eyes. So that was super, super simple. The other vendor we use is Connect Direct through CSD for sign language, and that did require some integration. I can't say I did that integration myself. We do have a team dedicated to it. However, I think that going with partners that are really specialized in this area know what they're doing. They have a community, they have a process for doing integration with multiple platforms. So it was pretty easy to set up, to say the least.
Well, yep, exactly. It's not a big lift integration with Be My Eyes. It's a relatively light lift compared to all the other integrations that you might be used to. And so that was one of the benefits of working with Be My Eyes. Was it was pretty straightforward and simple and didn't require a lot of resources on our end at all.
And the product, the Be My Eyes product, has evolved a lot since you guys got started on it. Obviously, you've been instrumental in helping us design it in a way that's sleek and scalable and simple. And we're always kind of looking at what are the optimum ways for organizations to integrate. I want to get to the point that kind of the accessibility is often used in reference to product. And like you said, Kendra, product excellence. How does having a disability support structure at your company actually lead to the excellence of your products and services? Neil, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest value of our having a dedicated disability support desk. It's great that we have great customer sat and all that good stuff, but it's, as I mentioned, it's the voice of the customer and being able to translate that back into, in our case at Microsoft, is translate that back into the engineering groups to help them prioritize feature requests, fixes. We've done so many improvements with Narrator, with Magnifier, all because of what customers are telling us through our disability answer desk, what they want and what works for them, or how we work with JAWS or NVDA, all these important partners of ours. Like, so much of that comes through the disability answer desk, and without having it, we probably wouldn't be able to do things that we've been doing. And so the real ROI, the business impact, is not just the front end of great customer satisfaction scores, lower cost, but the back end of improving your product and services. And that's what we've been able to tangibly do over the last few years.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ROI. I mean, when I write up the impact of what this team has done, it's certainly, yes, like Neil said, the CSAT scores and things like that, and how many people we've helped. But the real impact is how many, I'll call bugs or issues that we have found, or feature requests that have been implemented in products, or new products that have completely been launched because of feedback from customers. So I would definitely say that's the main reason for doing this.
So essentially, it's an ongoing usability study where you're taking direct feedback from your products out in the wild, and from a group that is that knows how to use their that is using assistive technology, and you're getting these sort of insights you weren't getting before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about who these people are and how your disability support centers are actually helping people. We hear amazing stories every day at Be My Eyes from our users about what a joy it is to get support from all the specialized help partners on there, not just Google and Microsoft. We'll mention a few of those in a few minutes here. But do either of you have any stories that pop out at you as your favorites of ways that you've helped folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, when I read the verbatims of customers, I'm trying to understand, like, what are the scenarios that customers are calling us about? And it's things that, I don't think I realize. It's like, maybe they need help with their Windows, but they can't connect to the internet to even troubleshoot, or they're having issues with their wireless printer, or there's no audio on their screen reader. And so there's all these scenarios that customers write us and say, I'm so thankful that you were there and I was able to use my Be My Eyes app to get support because my computer wasn't working, or I couldn't connect, or something like that. And so those are the kind of scenarios that we get calls, DMII calls all the time for just typical stuff like, help with the operating system and installations. But it's those unique scenarios that BMI is just so helpful for, that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have one that really sticks out, but we see for the most part, maybe someone just purchased a Chromebook and they're switching to Chromebox for a screen reader. And as much as I would love to say Chromebox is, or any screen reader, super easy, there's always a learning curve trying to find the shortcuts and things like that. So it's really not just helpful on the customer side, it's actually almost more helpful on the agent side to be able to walk them through the screen. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've called about my Wi-Fi and have to wait 5 minutes because she's telling me, look for the green light. And I'm saying, I swear it's not there. Besides the be colorblind, it's not there. And so it'd be really nice even for me to have a one-way video for someone to be helping me. So I think it's helpful on both ends.
Oh, you have permission to use Be My Eyes, Kendra. I want to tell one quick story. We have these community calls for our users, right? We actually talk to users all around the world. And just on the very most recent one, a blind guy called in from Singapore, and he had just gotten this new job. And there's, culturally, like, I don't know if it was cultural or if it was just him, but he didn't want to ask for support with his AT, with his assistive technology from his new employer, because he wanted to inspire confidence. And he found that he could call you guys through specialized help, and he was able to get totally all of his questions answered and up and running, and really, really be a productive employee, and not give his brand new employer any reason to doubt that hiring this blind guy was not a good decision. So it's those sorts of stories that make me realize, Kendra, we're going to talk about the business case in a minute here, but 80 some odd % of people who acquire a disability while they're working age, right? While they're in the workforce. And so you're supporting people who can contribute to the workforce. It's not just about supporting folks who are retired or folks who are born with disabilities. This is about people who have disabilities, as adults. I think it would be, we'd be remiss to not allow plenty of time here to give folks what we really sort of promise here, which is, how do you make a case for accessibility? And this doesn't even necessarily need to be about creating a disability support center or empowering, your customer service team with tools. Broadly, how do we make a case that giving resources to accessibility and disability programs is a good thing for a company to do? Kendra, I want to start with you here, because you wrote out these 4 great points for why accessibility is important in your playbook. And I don't know if you realize, but if you had ordered them slightly differently, it would make an acronym, CURE, right? CURE. So you have, and you'll recognize these, we have compliance, you have usability or the user's experience, the R, what is the R? Revenue, and of course, ethics, right? Ethically, it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to take your playbook and tweak it a little bit to say that is the cure, right? And I wonder if you could talk a little more, Kendra, about when you're pitching in at Google, you can obviously point to Microsoft and say this has been successful for them, but their playbook wasn't published yet, right? You didn't have that great document to point to. So what sort of statistics do you give to leadership when you're convincing them that, yeah, there actually is revenue here. There actually is real tangible benefit.
Yeah. Darn, I wish you had told me that CURE. That's so cool. Missed that one.
Right.
First and foremost, so I come from a communications background. So first and foremost, I would say try and mirror your leadership as much as possible. If Google is very much a data company. And so I tried in the beginning, which was 4 years ago, and it's a very different space now. But so I try to use as many numbers as possible and as many data points as possible that I could find with my leadership. And also it depends again on the company, because I needed buy-in from multiple leadership within Android and YouTube and Chrome, because I needed money from every single product area or team essentially to buy into this. So it really depended on the person. We had, someone who I knew was already heavily involved in accessibility, and that's when I brought more of, I think, the stories of it around, it's good for business. It's also good to do the right thing. I think on for example, the cloud side or the education side, I think the revenue was probably a better one to bring into that. That's obviously one of our revenue streams is the cloud side. So compliance, whenever I spoke to policy teams or legal teams, that's what I would bring up there. So I just kind of would merge it. And I think in my lessons learned doc, the reason I wanted to put a whole section of why is accessibility important in pitching is because I didn't have that when I was first going to my leadership. So I'm not going to lie, it took about a year to actually get all of the buy-in that I needed. And it was a constant pitching and saying why is accessibility important and bringing in the numbers and bringing in revenue and compliance and all these reasons. So I hope that that's used as, something for pitching moving forward, because it has a little bit of both in there.
What's the pitch you make? Is it all about top down? Is it all about getting leadership buy-in, or is this a grassroots effort that gets accessibility put on the agenda?
Yeah, I've seen it done both ways at companies. We talked to a lot of companies. Sometimes it's top down, a lot of times it's bottom up. I think you have to have a combination of both. At Microsoft, I think a lot of it for us has been a cultural play, which is, you start with the premise that disability is a strength, right? And that's key. And that, if you look at our mission statement, I didn't have to write a mission statement. It's like empower every person and organization on the planet, right, to do more. And so, it's very natural that we want to be thinking about how we can be more inclusive for everyone. And that's our products, our services. In this case, is taking it a step further to say customer support. And so I think, once we educated folks on the numbers that you talked about and Kendra talked about, I think it became very evident. And I think, again, like anything, it's starting small. It's not building out this big infrastructure and 24/7 and hiring a bunch of folks. I mean, we took existing folks that were already working and, moved them into this, pod-like team. And, again, it was not a big investment, but then quickly you could start seeing the ROI. And that's where it was easier to get, further investment to kind of grow the business. But for us, it's a big cultural play more than anything.
Yeah, and before we, I want everyone to look at the numbers in the playbooks. We could talk about numbers all day long, but they're written down for everyone to use, and please use them. They're big numbers. It's like, $8 trillion. Like you're saying, Kendra, $8 trillion in spending power out there. 80% of millennials expect companies to be, publicly making comments about good corporate citizenship. There are very clear numbers out there that show that disability support is not a niche thing. But before we go to Q&A and allow people to really ask some of their questions, I want to address everyone in the room who may not be, tech support or thinking of this from a tech perspective. They may not even have a B2C product. You may have a B2B product, or maybe you're thinking more about your employees. Over the course of the next few weeks, if you follow us with Be My Eyes, you're going to see announcements about new partners who are joining Be My Eyes for Work to create these sort of internal private support networks that allow fellow employees, colleagues, HR departments to support within a proprietary network where the data doesn't flow outside of the organization. And then also these, like I said, you can support users in any way. The thing about accessibility is that blind and visually impaired people And I can only speak, being blind myself, I can only speak for, my community here. But we're boxed out of so many experiences in life. Almost every single product or service has some accessibility barrier. And so it doesn't matter whether you're a computer company or simply packaged goods or products, software, hardware, tools, physical products, or digital products. There is some way that you can remove barriers for people with disabilities. I would point to an example. One of my absolute favorites is another one of our specialized help providers, the Clearblue company, which is part of Procter & Gamble, that actually, with a very small dedicated team of customer support folks, just a few people, totally change people's lives, a whole bunch of people's lives every week, by helping support with home pregnancy and fertility tests. This is a product that came onto Procter & Gamble's radar as not being particularly accessible to people with low vision or blindness. And so they leveraged Be My Eyes. They assigned a few people to answer calls. And now people all over the globe, women and couples all over the globe, can make these video calls and get private, anonymous access to the results of their tests without having to ask a friend or a family member or continue to feel that lack of independence. I just throw that out there as one example of how this doesn't have to be someone who's an expert in code or tech support or anything else. It can simply be a pair of eyes or someone who speaks ASL who's assigned to support with a particular task. So we'll be reaching out to folks. You're going to meet some of the Be My Eyes team, and we'll be reaching out to everyone, offering up a series of brainstorming sessions where, being the experts on blindness, we can really help you brainstorm what are the use cases, what are the ways in which I can chip into this movement and really feel like we're making a big impact. Unless Kendra and Neil have anything else they want to add, any sort of burning points, I just want to kind of wrap up here and then take a couple questions before we sign out. Do either of you have anything you want to add? Or Caroline, I love that you've been staying with us and listening.
I think the only other thing I'll add, because I've gotten this question a lot from people and within the support side, is there are a lot of companies that are actually looking to reduce the number of contacts they're receiving versus, Microsoft and Google, we focus on trying to get more connection with users. And so that's completely understandable. And I think that, again, this is in both our playbooks, but 68%, just on the Be My Eyes side, 68% of a shorter average handle time than phone. I think that's just another really strong stat to understand that this, yes, it's about connecting and meeting people where they are, but it's also drastically reduced how long we're on conversations, which has really helped as well.
Yeah.
Could I add something in, just listening to the conversation around the business case and another big meaty number? And it's to Kendra's point. It's not only what the 1.3 billion, but it's friends and family. And that is a figure of 54% of our global consumers. Like, I'm sorry, but that is not to be ignored. And so when you link it into the business case, the other business case is it's about risk-proofing your business and about brand. And I think that is now, I know it's a more negative one, but I think it's becoming very real with the amplified voice of the disability community through social media. So I think that's another part that we're seeing emerging. Like, we have these 285 companies, they represent 14 million employees and 4 trillion globally. They're not doing it because it's good. They're doing it because they see there is a business case.
Yeah. Neil, any final thoughts?
No, I think you hit all the great topics, and looking forward to some questions.
Wonderful. Joe, I know you've been monitoring the questions. Joe Weber from Be My Eyes. Any you want to toss out to the group?
Yes, and I've been tracking everyone's great questions, and I promise that we will follow up with as many as we can as well, because there are some great specific questions, but I want to focus on things that are most relevant to our panelists. I'm going to start with Scott Crosby, who asked, because I know we have a lot of folks who work more specifically on diversity and inclusion teams at their companies, is how closely does the disability teams work with diversity inclusion teams at Google and Microsoft? Also, who's responsible for making sure all internal training is accessible to the employees?
So this is Neil, I'll start. So the second question, all internal trainings are accessible to all employees. So at Microsoft, it's a multi-layered answer. So every team is responsible to ensure that they produce accessible content both externally and internally for employees. We have a centralized accessibility team that I'm part of that will support and provide that kind of expertise. But each organization builds that capability, whether it's marketing or in HR or, in sales. And so, everything that we produce internally needs to be accessible. As far as the working with broader D&I, I think, so the answer obviously is yes. And it's really looking at it, we're at the table a lot talking about disability inclusion and talking about what we're doing and learning from others in the D&I space and looking at where are those sections that we can, collaborate and share. So there is forums to do that. And we're very focused on the disability inclusion end for sure.
Kendra?
I'll leave it at that because that's pretty much exactly how we're built as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that, everyone in our community feels like these D&I and the goals of D&I and the goals of accessibility departments should be fused and should be overlapping. And you can't have inclusion without including people with disabilities. It's a super important part of the conversation. And had some really wonderful conversations with heads of D&I over the last few weeks, thinking broadly about how we can connect our stories of the disability community and the other communities represented typically by these D&I departments. Joe, what other questions have we got burning in the crowd? We've got about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, here's another one that's tied to that. Can you share how you systematically integrate consumer insights from existing products into your product development? So I take that as insights you've learned from receiving calls on the disability desk.
So on our end, what we've done is we've identified an executive sponsor, so to speak, that works really heavily with our central accessibility team. And what we did on the disability support side, we would set up quarterly meetings that essentially they weren't exactly report cards, but I'll call them report cards of, this is the type of feedback we've been giving, and this is how many bugs we have for you right now. And this is sort of our score for you in terms of accessibility. And we would work with them to see how can we start building this into your priority and your roadmaps and your pipelines, and what kind of support, would you need from us to do it? So we would essentially identify a very specific person within each product that we would work with.
Yep, and I think that's the same answer at Microsoft, which is we meet with the engineering teams on a quarterly basis. We present them the data, we present them the trends, we present them the verbatims, and we work on all those things Kendra mentioned around pipelining and scorecarding. I would also say that we actually open bugs and feature requests in the engineering systems, so they can actually work the issues real time when we get them from customers. And so we're able to do that too.
Great. That's such an important question, because none of this is, really sort of is as powerful unless the insights are being taken into action. Joe, have we got any other questions?
Yep, I think we have time for one more, even though there's been plenty of others. And I'm going to take one more here that might be a little bit more tricky one, but just in general, since the pandemic and the increase of remote working, can you speak briefly on just how you've able to keep these teams operating at full force?
On our side, I actually think this brings up a really important topic, and one that, again, Neil and I have had a lot of discussions around, which is, trying to hire more people with disabilities that can work remotely. I think that really increases your ability to recruit and hire and retain. And So of course, I think the pandemic, along with many things, has really forced us to learn that quickly. So our workforce, like everyone else, or like most people, are at home. And we've been able to shift pretty nicely to home. And so I don't know what our learnings are quite yet, but it's actually been going pretty well. If anyone is on the support side, I don't know if Harshal, who actually owns the support team now, is here, but feel free to chime in, and Neil as well. But I think that this is probably actually going to push us in a new, really great direction with regards to that.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think working from home is how we've been doing it. Our agents, our vendors, our full-time employees have all been working from home pretty seamlessly, which has been great to see. So,
Well, we're getting to time here, but I'll just add that we at Be My Eyes have pursued a number of nonprofit partnerships. We've brought on most of the major blindness organizations worldwide to join the Be My Eyes platform so they can stay connected with their consistent members. And over the course of the summer, you're going to see all these new brands rolling out on the specialized help platform. And we would love everyone who's on this call to reach out to us. We'll be reaching out to you to talk about how you can improve disability support. It means a lot more than just supporting customers. It means supporting their families. It means creating a culture of volunteerism and contribution amongst your staff. It means supporting employees with accommodations, and we can help with all these things. So thank you to all three of you. Thank you to Joe for handling the questions. Kendra and Neil, you've been absolutely amazing partners to have, and we're looking forward to what we're going to continue to innovate in the future. Caroline, hopefully we got you a few more companies for your valuable 500 today.
So much, everyone.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one. If anyone's still hanging around, ways you can continue to engage. Be My Eyes has some podcasts. You can find those at bemyeyes.com/podcasts. The Accessibility Podcast, 13 Letters, is a great one to listen to if you're new to accessibility. And there's some great folks from Google and Microsoft joining us there. And, please read through the playbooks that Kendra and Neil have created. They spend a lot of time and effort on them, and they're incredibly valuable documents. So thanks everyone for joining. And we will see you on the next one. We hope you'll join us for whoever we tee up for the next webinar of this type. Joe, anything to add from the Be My Eyes team side in terms of ways that people can get in touch, or next steps for folks who are enthusiastic at this point?
We will absolutely be reaching out to attendees, one, to share the recording and transcript of the video along with the playbooks. And like Will said, the first conversation we'd love to have is just to figure out how you can better serve your blind and low vision customers and employees. And we encourage that to be a collaborative, really fun conversation. And next to that, all the questions that have been asked, we'll make sure you get back to those individuals since we have all your contact information, and don't feel afraid to reach out.
Yeah, we're reachable by email at solutions@bemyeyes.com.
Mm-hmm.
Personally reachable at will@bemyeyes.com. And you can reach out to Joe J. Weber at bemyeyes.com. Kelly Egan is our wonderful account strategist. You can reach out to her at K Egan, EGAN. We're all kind of here and available. And so I'm just hanging out for the folks, the still 100 of you who are still with us. So that's kind of the joy of being able to work, working from home and being able to be a little more flexible with our time and not be running around like crazy from one thing to the next, right?
It's like the Saturday Night Live end credits, right?
Right, exactly. We're waving. Yeah.
The saxophone's playing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Caroline, thanks again for sticking with us on this.
It was a great conversation to listen to. Seriously, it was great.
Awesome. Well, I'll send you a message soon, and we'll reconnect over.
No, we just got to get you in front of all our valuable 500 companies. So it was fantastic for me. Thank you.
I hope some of them were here today. And
no, but if they're not, we're getting you guys in front of all of them because they need to be hearing this. So It's fantastic.
Thanks,
See you
Caroline.
guys. Bye.
What's
Thank you.
next? All right, take care.
Caroline.
We're going to end the webinar now.